What is the state of fan engagement? Well, across the top 5 divisions of English football covered by the index over the 2025 to 2026 season, it is obvious that fan engagement has become a significant focus of every club in the top 4 divisions and many in the National League Premier, the latter about which I discussed separately. That is a positive, of course it is. Number 2, certain clubs have now established themselves as consistent practitioners. Even after all their struggles on and off the pitch last season, Exeter City still won again, and it is a credit to their commitment to the culture of fan engagement. Likewise, clubs like Lincoln City, Swansea City, Bradford City, Brighton, Brentford, Everton, others, it's a tremendously positive thing. And personally speaking, I find myself to be quite excited by the fact that clubs are treating fan engagement this way and embedding it in the way that they run the business. Number 3 in our trends is that we're seeing a lot of clubs adopt fan advisory boards or shadow boards. Now, overall, I think these are a net positive. In the Premier League, they are mandatory. However, I suppose I'm more talking about what's going on in the EFL and to some extent as well in the National League Premier, particularly amongst, but not exclusively, former league clubs. However, as important and valuable as they are, and it's a really important point to make, they are not independent and are not designed to be. They are internal mechanisms. I covered this in a previous podcast, which you can find both on our podcast audio channels, and you can find that on our YouTube channel as well. They need to be treated as very different from independent organisations, especially where club officials are formally part of the FAB, something which we advise strongly against actually in our recent research project, establishing fan engagement as a core value. I have discussed, as I said, this recently, and you can look at that. And it is something that clubs need to start to understand, I think, better. And we need to perhaps adapt our practice to start thinking more about how we bring in independent voices. Now, that is the trend number 4, away from independent organisations of supporters, particularly supporters' trust. Now, this for me is a particular concern because they are proven repeatedly and over a period of decades to be an excellent external check and balance that I think every club that has them benefits from, even if they are in the boardroom, in fact, especially if they're in the boardroom or are owners. It is important, again, that we understand their role and that we appreciate that challenge has to sometimes come externally. Again, I've recorded another video on our YouTube channel, which is also a podcast on our podcast channel. So have a look at all our channels for that. Trend number 5, when it comes to the state of fan engagement, is the culture, and to what extent we're seeing the long-term changes in the actual culture of decision-making in football. Now, this is one, if I think actually not the most critical trend, the key trend for me, and that's to what extent are the structures and rules of fan engagement affecting the actual big decisions and the way they are being made. Now, is fan engagement and how it is structured having an objectively direct and long-term impact on decisions around issues that matter to fans? And by that I mean decisions like ticket prices, kick-off displacement, moving of stadiums, large-scale stadium changes, for example, as I said in the press release. Now, some might argue the improvements in fan engagement were not created to engineer a particular outcome when it comes to things like the ones I've mentioned. Instead, they were introduced in order to ensure that the voice of fans is taken into account in making decisions, particularly major ones with regards to football clubs, as I've outlined. However, we also have to acknowledge and understand that the very reason we ended up in the position we are with the rules we have in individual leagues about forms of engagement, fan engagement plans, the whole structure of fan engagement the Premier League introduced, which is now coming down further down into the professional pyramid, regular meetings between competitions and representatives from supporters' trust and other organisations, the FSA's regular dialogue with the Football League and the Premier League and also the National League. It wasn't because of a mere neutral appraisal of how decisions were made and that it was acknowledged collectively that fans needed to be more involved. The reason we ended up where we were and where we got to and where we are, including the IFR, changes to financial regulation and other rules, was the poor governance of clubs, leading to bankruptcy, loss of stadia, ratcheting up with ticket prices every year, and the constant moving of kick-off times. Now, these are all things that led us to down the path we are on when it comes to fan engagement. This was exemplified, as we know, in the bullheadedness that meant a collection of English football clubs were at the forefront of breaking away into a European Super League. So the truth of the matter is that despite some changes such as price cap for away fans and some outposts where ticket prices are not ratcheting up every season, as well as some general improvement in communicating things like kick-off changes well in advance I think the EFL are becoming very good at this. The trend, I'm afraid, I think is still largely negative. Ticket prices continue to increase, kick-off times keep changing, and often with very late notice. Significant alterations to stadia. I know of at least one occasion quite recently still being forced through without proper consultation. All of this often even without proper involvement of key fan engagement staff who can be sidelined. And match-going fans matter, which is often where a lot of fan engagement ends up being focused on, in particular to all of this, because their role is more akin to that of a participant in the actual match, in the game, rather than a mere spectator. Now, the problem we have is that football is still struggling to resist the demands for increasing player wages. I was listening to some interesting stuff on this the other day. I know one club who told me as well that the demands for wages from players over summer 2026 were higher than last year. Now, it might be that it's going to tail off as EFL and Premier League spending controls bite, but ultimately, if this is what is driving the constant ratcheting up of prices, if fan engagement is to have a genuine impact, prices will have to at least plateau. Now, I think all of this points to the fact that far too many owners, I think in particular, have convinced themselves wrongly that the principal reasons fans follow a club and are so involved and engaged with them is because they want to see victories on the pitch at any expense. Now, my experience over 20 plus years is that the reality tends to be more nuanced and begins first of all with security and competence. It's why we ended up with the regulator, why we ended up with rules on finances and ownership and all sorts. Security being that the club exists and the competence of owners and administrators are primary concerns, with willing obviously there, but not the principal driver. So ultimately, I think the challenge we all now face as an industry, clubs, regulator, the leagues, the Football Association, supporters trust, fan advisory boards, everyone, is that fan engagement, as I have said before, needs to get into the cracks, but it really does need to get into the cracks across the game and begin to directly affect many of the things that motivated the very changes that we have seen that brought us to this point, that the fan engagement index scores, that it reflects back on the game every year, and that game begins to pivot more and those decisions more in favour of fans and their long-term commitment to their clubs. Now, if you want to see the results or our growing body of research into fan engagement in football and sport, go to fanengagement.net.